Let's begin. I just want to welcome everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us for the Parks Department's update meeting on the Roslindale Wetlands Capital Project. I'm Paul Sutton. I'm the Urban Wilds Program Manager, and tonight we're going to update everyone on where we are in the design development process for the project. Before I go into introductions and the agenda, I just want to say that we really appreciate you taking time out to join us. We're so excited. This has actually been many years of planning and budgeting, and we're really excited to be at this point of the project. These wetland restoration projects are very challenging. It takes a lot of effort to undo a lot of damage to some of these ecologically sensitive areas. But we think that with this plan and with years of work, we'll be able to really turn things around. I just want to mention too, before continuing, as many of you know, we've had a lot of crazy storms pass through the area recently, and we've gotten a lot of calls on that. We're going to try to address some of the tree work in the next few weeks, but some of the work we'll try to fold in with this project. So without further ado, why don't we go through introductions? Joining me at Parks and Rec, we've got Liz Sullivan, who's the Director of Marketing and External Affairs. And then our design team is Crowley Cottrell, and we've got Michelle Crowley with us, Jessica Brown, and Anna Curtis Held. Joining as a sub is Tom Hughes from Hughes Environmental Consulting. And of course, our key partners with the Roslindale Wetlands Task Force and LANA. So that is the team working on this. And tonight what we'd like to do is just go over briefly how to comment. This will be a webinar format. We'll go over that a little bit. We'll give a recap of where we are in the process. We had the first community meeting very early on in the pandemic, and we just want to recap where we are. Then we'll talk a little bit about the design goals. This is, again, primarily a wetland restoration and trail improvement project. And then we'll go over where we are in the actual design update.
Great. All right, so just a quick, I'm Jessica, I'm with Crowley Cottrell. Just a quick overview of how to comment. This is a webinar. It's a little different than what we did for the last Zoom on for this project. There's no chat for participants. Your cameras are all off and we can't hear you, unfortunately. But you can ask questions and raise your hand. So asking questions will send your question to the moderator, who's Michelle Mish. And if it's appropriate and PG, she'll answer it or acknowledge it so that everybody can see that question. And if she can answer it on the spot, she will. Otherwise, she'll hold it to the end. We'll go over it at the end. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a time for question and answer live, where you can raise your hand and then the Mish can unmute you and we can, have a little back and forth with your question and go forward. And so she'll see the raised hands and answer and unmute in order, just so we're not all getting feedback. All right. And she can also interrupt in the middle if there's something pressing right away that I need to address. So a little bit about the process recap from what we've been doing. We started on this project. We had our first site visit back in March. Walked the site, got to see the foliage as it was unfurling. And then the next day we all went into lockdown. And so we did the first part of the public process in a sort of new fashion. We did our public opinion survey with 132 respondents. Was that right? I think that's right. And then we had our first Zoom public meeting on June 9th. Then there was a 2-week public comment period after that, where Paul collected emails and suggestions that way. So all of that input has really informed our process. We've listened to what we heard in the surveys, what we heard in the meeting, what Paul heard in that comment period. We regrouped and we started to develop the plans further. We've had feedback from not just the public, but also public agencies such as the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, the Conservation Commission, and the Public Improvement Commission. And that brings us to where we are today. Shortly after this meeting, given whatever feedback we get here, we will submit a notice of intent to the Conservation Commission. And there'll be a process with them for final permitting to give us the go-ahead to work in this sensitive area. Once we have that plan approved, then we can put the documents out to bid, and we are still hoping to get into construction in the spring. And as Paul mentioned, it is a complicated site, so we anticipate that construction will be, that especially the habitat restoration pieces will be ongoing process for quite a while after that, both with contractors, but also possibly community help if there's motivation. So the design goals. These design goals are really came out of that community process. Both the process that Paul has been going through with the community up until we arrived, and then further formed by what we heard in the survey and at the meeting and in those comments. So first and foremost, the project is about restoring the plant and wildlife habitat. As far as the trails, really focusing just on completing the trail loop. We had presented some other options about additional loops and additional trail. There didn't seem to be a lot of interest in that from the community, sort of really wanting to limit human access and turn over more to habitat. So we're focusing on just completing that trail loop, improving trail accessibility. So trying to make the trails easier for people with mobility issues, walkers, wheelchairs, etc., to be able to come in. So we're shooting for National Forest Service standards for accessibility as far as what the surface is made of, how much, not for the whole loop, but making sure that there are portions of the site that are accessible to people so they can enjoy the wetland. But also in some places where it's more challenging and will continue to be more challenging, just making sure that the trails aren't too muddy, that you can get across at certain places that have been blocked up to now. Then the fourth piece is making the entrances more welcoming. There was a lot of interest in that. And overall, just minimizing impact, as I said at the beginning. And that's sort of going back to restoring plant and wildlife habitat as the main goal, and making sure that whatever improvements we do to the trail, whatever signage we do, that we're trying to have a light touch and not go overboard, because this really is an urban wild, right? It's not a park, it's urban wild, and keeping it wild is a main goal.
Jessica,
So,
we had a question regarding the budget. Do you want me to comment on that, or would you like to? Or sure. So for this project, we budgeted 500,000, and we are hoping that when this project goes out to bid, we'll get lots of competitive bids and get good pricing. We'll have to take the lowest qualified and responsive bidder, but that's how much we've lined up for this project, 500,000. It's the equivalent of what like a small tot lot playground project would cost. So the dollars are really going far in this project.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Also, as far as what I'm about to go through in terms of the improvements, this is everything we're going forward with to permitting. As far as what we'll have the budget to do, we're going to have to structure the contract so that, we can make that 500,000. If the bids come back really high, to be completely honest, we've seen pricing. We've done a cost estimate and we think we can do all of these things, but we've seen, because of the pandemic, pricing sometimes way higher than we're used to, and actually sometimes way lower than we're used to. So we're going to have to be a little bit flexible, but this is what we're going forward, what we'd like to go forward to permitting with. So we'll go over the overall trail improvements, the areas for restoration of the wetland, and then each of the entrances. So here is a map. We've got Coniston Road down here, Selwyn over here, Hazelmere, and then the Weld Street entrance up here of what we'd like to achieve in this project. One of the big areas is down here at Coniston. That's a huge area of knotweed right now. Trying to revert that to more of a native meadow and really simultaneously improve it as an entrance point. So getting a path in here that is accessible, that Forest Service accessible path. That's this dark blue color here. So a couple of out and backs that people could get to. With mobility issues. One of these, for example, might be something that a budget would have to delay, but because that's sort of an extra there. Going around, there's a few places where there is a good amount of invasive trees. So here, down here, there's some amber cork up here. Those are places where we would be removing some invasive and or hazardous trees and then replanting with more native species. We've got the trail loop overall being connected through here with a couple of boardwalks. There's one boardwalk here to get you through that steep area between Robkin Road and Coniston Road. There's another boardwalk we'd like to put here to get you over the wetlands there. Then working this this edge that is currently pretty rocky and overgrown, and working that edge to get a path in around to where there's right now an abandoned boardwalk that you know, when these houses were built, it's our understanding that having a boardwalk there and access was part of the development criteria for those houses. That boardwalk is no longer usable. So taking that out and getting one in that's more secure and not going to float away as the last one did across through here. And then on these two edges where the wetland property really butts up against neighboring houses, rather than putting in fences, putting in some native planting to define that edge and some small boundary markers at the lot corners. Then coming around, adjusting this path so that it comes down to the wetland so you can really get a sense of the wetland. Right now it comes uphill a bit. In this area, there was a large amount of soil dumped into the wetland. So removing that soil, removing the knotweed that is there, and replanting that area. Through here, you see a few brown rectangles. Those are wet areas where we're proposing to put bog bridges, like you can see up here in this photograph. Again, this is the boardwalk here to point you to the pictures, and this accessible route is just right here. This trail that's really built up is really only this accessible out and back. The rest of it would be just a stone dust path, a dirt trail, only built up like this in these couple of places. The stair being right there. And that's sort of the big overview. And then I can get more into each entry. Paul, did I miss anything? Do you want to add anything to that?
No,
overview?
that sounded good.
Okay. Here we have an overview of the habitat restoration area. So in purple, we've got the knotweed. That's going to be, you know, what we're proposing to the Conservation Commission is that that's a pretty aggressive treatment. It's a pretty aggressive plant, requires pretty aggressive treatment. Whereas the English ivy and maybe the creeping buttercup and also the garlic mustard, sorry, that was both of those species are in this yellow area, might be more community effort or you know, maybe with a kickstart in this project, but a longer time frame. Then there's also the multiflora rose, which is something that probably in this project we'll try and get as far as we can with the money. And then there's just a tiny bit of Phragmites that we'd like to nip in the bud. Anything else on here in this one, Paul?
No.
Okay, great. So moving in, zooming in a little bit to the entrances, we've got the Selwyn Street entrance. The Selwyn Street continues, well, there's a paper street that continues off the end of Selwyn Street. So the city has interest in this half of that area, whereas the neighbor here has, you know, there's lawn growing in this half. So to make that edge a little more visible, we're proposing to put just sort of rock boundary markers and make more lush planting. It still needs to be passable, so we have to keep the plantings in this area pretty low. Improving the path here, improving this granite curb here, and getting access up into this area. A lot of new planting because we will hopefully be taking out some of the Norway maples in that area, and taking away the broken bench that's over here right now, and putting in a stone bench that should be durable and kind of blend in with the aesthetic of the place as natural and also impacted. And then lastly, putting up a sign, hoping to get all of the signage that is needed into one sign. So both the name of the park, the map, and any interpretive information that we want to put on here. And I think that's the gist of this entrance. I gave the confused look because I thought I had changed this sign picture to a smaller one for this area, but it gets the point across. I did, yeah, this is, some of my updates didn't make it to this one. I'm not sure what happened. This is the Coniston Street entrance. This is where we're really hoping to knock back that knotweed in a big way and really change the appearance. To put a nice path through here that gets you out to that those accessible turnarounds, to improve this edge so that there's some debris, I would say, along this edge of the property that would be cleaned up. There's a collar of stones around that tree that we would clean out. But mostly it's focusing on this knotweed and getting some new plants in here, cleaning up the edge so that there's a nice threshold of tidier lawn right on the street, so that there's a transition from the sidewalk into the wild area, and then putting a bike rack and a sign here as well. This is an image from Google Street View of that area. I don't know exactly what day they took the photo, but you can see it's pretty overgrown. The path is not particularly clear. It's not clear that there's anywhere to go down that route. And we're hoping to clean that up a bit, make it a bit more welcoming, and put some signage and a bike rack through here. The next entry is, we've got is Hazelmere. This is, again, signage and a bench here. Some of these boundary markers to discourage folks from cutting around down this way. There are some trees, some of the trees that Paul mentioned at the beginning that he might take out before this contract goes to bid, just because they are seemingly dangerous right now. Some trees through here that might get taken out, and we could replant in here. Again, a threshold of more tidy planting in the front, so as you can transition from the city into the urban wild, perhaps getting some bulbs in there. And then the last entrance is Weld Street. Weld Street is also a paper street. This is Morrison Street. It's a private street, which means that there needs to be public accessibility across this, despite the fact that these neighbors have interest in these areas. So what we're proposing is no signage, no structures, anything in this area, but painting the edge of this driveway with a green path that you might see, say, on a bike path, and a Parks Department logo, and then a stone dust pass through here. And then once you get to the Parks property proper, putting in some signage there that you might be able to see from the street, just to make anybody walking along the Arboretum feel like, oh, that's somewhere I could go in. And that is the broad overview of what we are doing. And I guess we'll open up to, Paul, do you have anything to add? And then maybe we can open up to questions.
No, I would just, the only thing I would add is that the portion of the restoration on near Hazelmere where there was that fill, that'll be a huge chunk of the budget.
Mhm.
Removing all that fill, bringing in regrading that and restoring that area. That'll be a really, really big piece of it. The only other thing I'd mention is Weld Street. That came up a lot in the first meeting, right, Jessica? I think there was big interest in making that more cleaned up and recognizable as an entrance.
I think in the first meeting we had said, well, this one doesn't seem as important, and we got a lot of feedback being like, yes, it is. So we're really trying to do what we can there. All right. So should I keep this up? I can't really see if there are questions or raised hands. Misha, are you seeing?
There was one question that asked about how many linear feet of trail do we know total and ADA section, and is there a benchmark trail dollar amount per linear foot? Are we prepared to answer that now, or do we need
I would have to stop sharing and look in the files. So I don't have that.
So Frank, if it's okay, we can get you that answer. Later, and we will make the questions available.
I can reshare that, but I'm gonna poke around and see if I can find that.
One thing I can add while we're looking at that is tried to think about path widths and what were the existing conditions. So the existing conditions are comparable to a footpath, right? So we're thinking of the new paths that'll join in with the existing would be the same width. So you'd have roughly like 3 feet with a foot on either side. So that would be that would kind of make it feel consistent. The only area would be a little bit wider would be on that coming in Coniston. And I think the path width would be more like 5 there.
Okay. So there's a question. You'll be taking out invasives. What will you replace them with? I don't think we talked quite enough about the planting.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you want me to start with that, Jessica?
Yeah, if you want to start, should I do this path amount as maybe a follow-up email?
Yes, let's just do that. We can do that later.
Okay.
So for the restoration pieces, when we're removing or trying to reduce invasive plants and restore plant communities, we're also looking at diversity of habitat, right? So it's not just one landscape type. So Coniston, which is very upland, I mean, you are street side, we're looking at grasses and forbs. So flowering plants and grasses there. In the other areas, we're looking at, remember the margin between the actual wetland and the property boundary in some of these areas is very, very narrow. So we're, for example, like coming in at Selwyn or Hazelmere for that matter, we're looking at plants that what's really going to complement that wetland edge. So these are plants that a lot of shrubs, right? That's the layer of the plant. That's the most impacted layer of the whole system. So we'll be looking to do, these would be wetland shrubs along the edge. They could be live stakes. They could be things like red osier dogwood, willow, things that can be economically, that's the other thing too, we're trying to watch costs, right? So for meadow grasses over in Coniston, that's very economical. For the wetland areas, trying to look at shrub and smaller trees that would be perfect wetland habitat for wildlife. And the trees that are introduced, remember, we got a lot of trees down there. We want to think about trees that are compatible, right? That are more understory trees. I think, Jessica, we might have a plant palette already.
Yeah, some of the things that we're considering are for trees are serviceberry, the Amelanchier canadensis. We've got speckled alder, red maple, sugar maple, eastern red cedar, black gum, American hornbeam, swamp white oak, pin oak. Those are some of the trees that we're considering. And for shrubs, a few of the shrubs that we're considering are clethra onlifolia, the sweet pepper bush, buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis. We've got the silky dogwood, Cornus amomum, Cornus cervica, the red austere dogwood, and witch hazel. Those are some of the things that we have on the list right now, plus the wetland mix and an understory seed mix and a meadow mix. So there's a few different, and a fescue mix. So there's 4 different seed mixes as well that we're looking at for different parts of the property.
And we're keeping in mind too, things like which ones are the really hardiest of the natives, right? Where we do have wet areas, which plants have wet feet, which ones are going to really thrive there, looking at things that are in the upland areas, drought tolerant, tolerant of deer foraging. So those are all going into the mix, I think, in our considerations.
So the next question, Tom, perhaps you could respond to. It's, can you clarify how you plan to eradicate the garlic mustard? This year it seemed pretty aggressive.
Okay. So as I think we've already talked about, the budget only goes so far. What we're doing with the invasive protocol is we're trying to focus on those areas that I think were gone over in the presentation. And in our permitting, we are including methodologies that I think are best adapted for volunteer activities. Garlic mustard is an annual, so it's best dealt with by large groups of people pulling plants. It's not really well suited for being controlled by a contractor during a limited duration. So what we're going to be doing in the permitting with the Boston Conservation Commission is permitting not just the methodologies of removal and replacement for the project, but also longer term that can be used with volunteers or park staff. I see some areas of garlic mustard, depending on where the budget allows, we may be able to tackle during the project, but I do see that as one of the plants that's better suited for a longer term control using volunteer groups on an annual basis. If we can pull it before the seed pops, you can actually get rid of it pretty quickly if you have enough people pulling.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, the plans are attractive. Could you talk about the rear of 108 Walter and public access from Walter Street? This seems like an omission.
Do you want to talk about that? Because the Walter Street is deliberately omitted because it's not yet owned, correct?
Right.
But it's future phase.
Right, exactly. You're right. When this contract went out to bid for design services, it was, under the existing scenario where 108 is still privately owned. Of course, right now the city has been working successfully so far with Lana, a Wetlands Task Force, to get funding, grant funding, combined with some city funding to acquire 108 Walter Street and fold it into the rest of the site. And if that successfully concludes, what we'll do is go back to our design team here and see if they'd be willing to amend our contract and design another entry into Roslindale from Walter Street.
Okay, there was a second question about that as well. So hopefully, Suzanne, that answered yours as well. The next question is, could you talk about how you accounted for BWSC easement from Coniston Road and the one from Walter?
So they have, those are paper streets and they have a right of way. And we had a meeting with the Boston Water Sewer Commission just to make sure we understood to coordinate what they might need to do as far as maintenance over the years and what we were trying to build to try and make sure that A, we weren't going to put anything in that was going to be disruptive to their work, and B, to make sure that if they were doing any work that we could coordinate the schedules. So they have been in the process of scoping their lines over there to make sure that if they have any work they do need to do, we can do it as much as we can in concert with this project. But also, I don't think that anything that we're doing doesn't seem like it will really be in their way.
This is a great question. The next one is, could you say a little bit about plans for access to the trails during the restoration?
Sure. Right. So this one of the challenges I think with this site is that, again, that the area between the wetland and the edge of the property is so narrow. I think we anticipate, and I want to hear from the design team too, that if this project is in fact successfully permitted and put out to bid to allow us to start next April or May, that the contractor would really need the site to be temporarily closed, a lot for safety and liability, so that the work could get done. We'd need to work with the contractor on the sequencing, what parts of the property are worked on first. Maybe there's a possibility to keep some open. What is the design team, their view on that?
I mean, I think it is a huge factor on the means and methods of the contractor that is selected. And so there's going to be times where we're going to be really focused on some of the invasives on one part of the site. And there's not much we can do until the second round of that growth happens. And so we could focus then on working on another part of the site. So I do think we can leave parts of the park open, and with the trail unfortunately being cut off, but you could get to a certain point and then turn around. But again, we'll have to really wait to see what the sequencing for the contractors, because if we just don't want them to, they may not want to do this in phases. So it's sort of like all trail work's going to happen at the same time. And so for that period of time, it might be closed off. But if we're doing only invasives for a month, then the part of it could still be open. So I think we have to leave that a little bit open-ended until we have a contractor on board. The next question is, how are you going to establish priorities for the budget? Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you had already mentioned a couple things that are the sort of the top priority, and then other things that would be add alternates.
Yeah, I think that, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way that we've been talking about this is that there are certain things that are capital improvements that a contractor can just get done. And then there are pieces that of the restoration that a contractor can get started. And then there are pieces that are longer term. And I think that one of the ways that we're prioritizing is getting that one and done stuff done, because there are a lot more options on how to approach that other stuff in the future, including volunteer labor, et cetera. So I think that the first round of priorities is the trail work, the tree work, and the replanting work for that tree work. Now, one of the things I mentioned as an ad alternate was, say, that spur that goes out into the wetland from Coniston Street. That is something that very easily could just not be done. And so that one we've talked about calling an ad alternate, which means if we get everything else first, everything else that we want, that'll be the last thing that we add back in if there's money. I'm not sure that there was, because the budget is actually looking preliminarily like we can do what we've shown you today. I'm not sure we're not overstuffing that category of what can we just leave out completely, because the rest of it really is needed for making that loop, which is, the loop is a high priority. So that, anything to add to that, Paul?
No, I don't think so. I think we tried to keep this, minimal impact, trying to address the most important things. So there aren't a lot of extras, but I do think that turnpike that you just mentioned could be the first thing to go if need be.
The next question is, are all the Castor Aurelia trees considered invasive? Will you be addressing them?
We are planning to address them, yeah. I don't know about all, if we're going to be able to afford or address all, but that's the same answer it is for all of the invasives. But there is taking down a number of those and replanting that area with natives is definitely in the plan.
Okay, the next question is, the conservation housing effort at 108 and 104 Walter seems to be moving along well. There may be an opportunity for an additional parallel project when machinery is mobilized during the 104 Walter redevelopment that could remove invasives, regrade paths, create new pedestrian access and signage at 108 Walter. Paul, if you feel you've already answered that, we can move on.
We'll need to see where we are exactly on both fronts at the time that the construction contract is awarded for this one. And we have a narrow window in which to work, remember, with the weather and the site, the wetland constraints. So we'll have to weigh everything out and see what's happening on that 108 Walter Street. But obviously where we can coordinate for efficiencies makes the most sense. That's why we were coordinating with Water and Sewer about that agency doing an investigation of the sewer lines coming in to 104 now. So I think that's how we'll approach that.
The next question is, you haven't mentioned buckthorn, which is coming in more in various places. And then again, the mature Castor Aurelia trees continue to seed along Eastern Path. Will they be cut and treated?
I think of the 35, of the 30 urban wilds throughout the city, I think Roslindale is probably second to one other site, probably the most disturbed. So there's a lot of work to do with invasive plant management, and we'll have to really be strategic in how we go about it and prioritize. I think when we were looking at this, right, design team, we were looking at the entrances, the wetland edge. I mean, that at the core, that's what this project is, a wetland edge. We know there's a lot of upland at Walter Street, and we want to do that too. We'll just have to be mindful, and maybe we can talk about this with the design team about, do we have an allotment, multiple allotments for invasive plant management? How do we go about doing that? So we'll see. I think that Mass Audubon report was really helpful, though, for us trying to assess where these invasive plant communities were and populations were, and how we could start to tackle them. And I think Audubon had kind of suggested try to work from the wetland out, right? And kind of you're putting all this effort into restoring the wetlands, get that wet edge between the trail and the wetland under control first, and then radiate outward. So we will see, but we want to get as much done as we can with this.
So the next question, these are design questions for all urban wilds. Can you briefly address, as applicable, are there viewing platforms with bench seating like at Bell Island Marsh? Should I just read all of these and then we can talk? Habitat restoration, public access balance. Example, does the path need to be brought down close to the wetland edge? Surveying, encroachment, enforcing, dog walking, and then the need and value of signage.
Right. Okay.
Oh, Paul, you're
I think that's a key feature of this too, right? We're spending a lot of effort trying to enhance wildlife habitat. And I think that obviously with this boardwalk between Eldon and Hazelmere, that'll be a vantage point at which you can see certainly wildlife and get glimpses of, some parts of the site that are more hidden. I think the turnpike that Jessica spoke of, that is an area too, and it's already, this is like a water and sewer easement where they have infrastructure, so it's already developed, so to speak,
yeah.
right? But that is an area where you walk out and you do get a almost like a 180, I would say, vista of the wetlands. So those are two, and I want to say, is there a bench over behind the houses on Coniston? I think there's a bench on that side, right?
we have the benches right now are at the entries. There wasn't a lot of interest in the last time of having them throughout.
Right.
There is one other lookout point, which is down by the wet meadow. Maybe I should share again. Share my screen. So this is the turnpike we've been talking about as a thing that might be one of the first things to go, but it's also a place where you can get out and look around and have this bigger view of the wetland. There is this boardwalk, which is, I think, going to be really special because that you are crossing open water sometimes across that. The third one would be there. The end of this accessible route, there's a turnaround, which would be another place to sort of naturally stop and look out. I think the view of the wet meadow down there is pretty good from that spot. But the benches are more by the entry. This bench is nicely situated to this piece of the wetland. I think there was some concern about just an eyes on the park, not that it's a park, but an eyes on the street sort of sensibility about where the benches are. So they're near the entries.
I think the other, getting to the question that someone had raised about, how to balance habitat with access. I think that's a delicate balance. I think the trail width being so small, relative, again, like coming in on by Hazelmere, talking about a 3 foot wide with stone dust or soil path with a low fescue edging, 1 foot edging on either side to make for 5 feet. That's pretty modest. So that's a real minimal intervention, I think. A big planting budget. So, I was over there yesterday and looking at all those mature trees that had gone down through that microburst or whatever it was. And I think, we're going to be adding a lot of trees, and we'll need to be strategic because we want to plant trees. We don't want to plant trees that are huge right next to houses. We want to plant trees that are going to, not pose a huge threat down the road. At this site, more than any other urban wild, we're constantly chasing down trees due to storms. And we want to really be strategic with the placement of these trees, but we know that we need to, where those trees are being removed, we're going for at least a 2-to-1 replacement, I think, right, Jessica?
Yep.
Yeah.
Trying.
Was there
Yeah,
another
there was a
one?
couple more, like surveying, encroachment, and enforcing, dog walking, and the need or value of signage.
Yes. So the surveying, yeah. So we're going to be trying to address those things. We had the two of the biggest damage points for the property were on that restoration area on the graphic, which says remove, fill, and restore woodland. So that area, we will be putting in a protective fence there so that, this investment will be protected. And then other areas, there's just some minor encroachment that we've got to work out, but but the city is actively trying to work on these things. We've got the property manager, the design, and then the maintenance. So trying to juggle all these things.
So I think dog walking and the need and value of signs sort of go together. One of the things that's going to be on the signs is enforcing that there's no dog walking. So, we heard last time that there wasn't interest in a lot of signage, that once you were in the wetland, you wanted to just be in the wetland and not have somebody trying to teach you something or point anything out to you. But there is need for identity signage at the entry so people know where they are and where they're going, and know what the rules are, such as no dog walking, and that we are going to limit the interpretive signage to the two what we think of as the main entries at Hazelmere and Selwyn, because there is value in terms of, what is this place and what does it do for the urban environment to have a place like this, cleaning the water before it goes back out into the system, providing habitat, providing all of those benefits. So we are going to have minimal signage at the entries to do some education and promote the value of this place.
Yeah, I think those signs will be clear. And for residents and friends, when we do finish the work with the contract and the signs are up, that'd be a good time for all of us to kind of work together and just remind people who may not be aware about leash laws. I was there today and there was a coyote on site and someone had a dog off leash running into the middle of the wetland. So needs to be a little bit of an education process. And that's why we hired Audubon to really frame this project and this site with that being a big consideration, wildlife and plant habitat. So this is more of a sanctuary here we're trying to restore.
Tom, perhaps you could answer the next question, which is, what will you use to take out the knotweed?
That's a great question. It's going to vary. It's primarily going to be an herbicide approach. Japanese knotweed is a very difficult plant to control. It's really the method of application of the herbicide that is going to change depending on the condition. In some places, we have a monoculture of knotweed that's fairly dense and we don't have non-target species. In those areas, it would be a low pressure backpack spray application of either rodeo or habitat, which are two aquatic safe herbicides that would be applied to new growth. So we would cut out any dead, if it's a spring application, we cut out any dead material, and then we would apply it to the fresh growth. In areas where the knotweed is more scattered in and amongst other plants, there are two protocols that are currently in the draft invasive plan for those. One is a method called the bloody glove, which is where you have a cotton glove on the outside of a rubber glove, and you essentially directly apply with no impacts to non-target plants the herbicide. And another would be to stem inject down below the bottom joint on the knotweed. The idea in all of those cases, we apply the herbicide and we monitor the plant for about 2 weeks. And if we see it dying off, we feel good about it and we can move on. And if we have fresh growth, we retreat.
And just to put a caveat on that, that is, as Tom said, draft invasive plan pending approval from the Conservation Commission.
Right. And there's still a little bit of internal review that we have to do on that as well. But those are really the only ways, other than solarization, which takes a long time and is very difficult to do with knotweed.
Right. The question from Janet Forrester: in choosing the plants, is there any benefit of looking at which of our previous plantings have done well?
Yes. That's a great idea. In fact, when I brought the design team out to look at this back in March, we looked at that, what we called Shady Grove, over coming in by the Hazelmere entrance. And, those are all 2008 vintage trees. And we looked at the tree species, and I think we should look at it again. We had a high success rate for many of those plants, and we have already, but I'd like to go back and look again at those specific species and see which ones have grown, some of them at incredible growth rates. And when we do the new plantings, I was talking with Jessica today about, could we stagger the sizes of these plants to try to suggest a native natural system where you've got plants at different ages in the system, letting light into the system so they're not all the same size. So we'll look at that too, but that's a great idea.
The next question is, how does adding a Walter Street entrance affect the hierarchy of entrances from a design perspective? It seems like Walter Street would be a primary public access. That's a good question. I think that it's interesting. I know Roslindale residents and other local residents who, when I've mentioned this site, they said, "Oh, where is that? I've never seen that. And of course, it's very hidden, being surrounded by houses." I think when we did the survey with the community, we found, and Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong or right, that Selwyn was the major access point and Hazelmere was the major exit point. And that was kind of it. I think the advantage on Walter Street is that it's a more highly trafficked site. It's not great that it's a low point and it's on a corner. But I'd be curious to see what the design team thinks about that.
I think the important thing, since we haven't really looked at that in earnest at this point, is that we're not being particularly loud at any of these entrances. So to say that one would be, say we wanted to make it the main entrance as a greater hierarchy, there's not a whole lot you'd have to do to be more noticeable than what we are doing because we're trying to be so subtle. So, it could be of equal hierarchy with Selwyn and Hazelmere, and just have a small sign, or it could very easily be greater hierarchy and have more or lesser hierarchy, and have the smaller sign that we have at the others. So I think because everything we're doing is so minimal, we got a lot of flexibility about how we'll approach that when the time comes.
Okay, the next question is, there are 2 or 3 stretches of trail that are almost impassable muddy during the spring. Do I understand the plans to include some kind of reliable dry spans over these areas as were shown in an early photo?
Yes,
Those bog bridges that
fog
you
bridges, these guys.
showed, right, showing up right here.
So they're these brown runs. There's quite a bit of it, but these will be on. We've got them designed on concrete sleepers, so just like a 6-inch paver. Sorry, that these are spanning across. So the wood's not in the ground. The sleepers will be on in aggregate, so they should stay put. And you'll have and then these will span the muddy parts so the water can still pass underneath.
One thing I'd like to look at with the design team is the wood, and how can you make traction, how can you improve traction. We've done some boardwalks at some other areas, and some of them can get a little slippery. So maybe there's some texturing that can happen as well.
Yep.
All right, the next question is, once the project is complete, will there be funding for maintenance?
Yes, so what we'll do is, I think, the invasive plants are going to be with us for a long while. And I think what we'll need to do is as we talked about, try to combine our efforts I think it will definitely need some professional invasive plant management for a few years at least. And that will contract out. As far as there was some plants that could be part of a volunteer effort. I think that we will, what we'll try, the trees, hopefully hazardous trees will become less of a problem. I'm hoping that we can go to, twice a year, kind of a general cleanup. But we have a small budget that was approved for this fiscal year, but it's very small. And we have to be strategic. For example, I got quotes on the tree work from the storm damage. Almost one was in the order of $10,000. So we'll have to weigh these things, but yeah, this will definitely be a hybrid approach, right? We'll have the professional contractor applicator for the invasive plant management. We'd love to do a couple of cleanups with the Wetlands Task Force if they're still interested. We'll bring in some outside volunteers, but we'll also, the city has approved the creation of a horticulture position, permanent, that can be filled in the new year. So that person would be part of the maintenance equation, I think. So, but that's really important for sure.
The next question is there any planned resources for systematic and recurrent mosquito control or mitigation for hot weather access, but also for the general health of perimeter and other nearby residents?
I think that that area of grassland meadow, that will attract insects that certainly could help with the mosquito population. Also, the design team will remember that the Audubon report gave some different suggestions about mosquito control, and that could relate from anything from monitoring the catch basins near the entrance. I think there are these discs that can be placed in the catch basins to control the larva, mosquito larva. So that's one thing that can be done. Again, that grassland meadow, hopefully attract more mosquito eating insects. And then there's, it's some other sites, we've looked at the idea of bat boxes as a mosquito control. So there's a few different things we can do. I don't know if Misha or Jessica, you want to add anything, but those are just some general things we want. I think we want the site to be more, I think by removing the invasive plants, right? There will be more circulation of air through the system, and you won't get, it's where it stagnates and gets caught that makes it rife, perfect conditions for mosquitoes. We know that the water, right, only moves through the system during intense flooding. And that's something we don't have control over, but there's definitely, those are some things that we want to make sure design team, when we go doing the specs and the operations manual, we want to try to make sure we not forget that.
Yeah.
So the next question is, any chance of putting in a few well-suited native wildflower species in a few particular suitable areas?
Yeah, so the seed mixes that we have will have flowers in suitable areas. I think only one of them is pure grass.
Right, so like the area where we're taking the Japanese knotweed down is going to have wildflower
flowers
mix
in
as
it.
part of it.
For sure.
Next question is, do you plan on keeping snag trees as nesting cavities or removing because they are dangerous? There are numerous woodpeckers who rely on snags for nests. Tom, I think if you want to talk about that, that would be great. We are definitely keeping trees that stay there and will sometimes fall down. But any tree that might fall down on a path, we are going to be removing. But Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about
I
that?
just want to jump in. What we have in the plan is definitely certain number of the trees being cut to 12 feet so that they are low enough to not cause a hazard if they're close to the trail. First of all, we're not cutting trees that aren't close to the trail. So any snags that are off the trail and in the wetlands will remain. We'll be cutting hazardous trees on the perimeter down to stumps so that they aren't hazards to people's houses. And by the trails, we've got a provision that we can cut them to 12 feet so that so that the habitat is still there and they're not hazardous. So that's what's in the drawing. Tom, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll be girdling Norway maples and Amercork and the other invasive trees that are out there. And as Jess noted, you know, if they're close to the trail, if they're a hazard, they go. If they can be made safe by topping them, they would stay. And if they're far enough away from the trail, we'll just leave them and they become habitat. So.
Just quickly, the next is a statement that says, I like the approach of a 2-to-1 ratio for new trees to each tree needing replacement. Duly noted. The next is, how about using goats for the knotweed?
That's an interesting thought. Where you do have these areas that are just one plant, certainly they're non-selective, so they go for, we use them in a site in Hyde Park, and they weren't as effective at getting the problem plants that we had wanted, which in that case was poison ivy. But that's an interesting idea, that we know that the Franklin Park Zoo, this wouldn't work for this site, but uses Japanese knotweed to feed the giraffe. And the Parks Department is looking at, are there knotweed areas in parks that are not near these wetland resources that could be suitable. But it's such a hard plant to get rid of. I mean, we did Japanese knotweed removal at Allendale 5 years ago. We're still chasing down sprouts, I'm sure the design team has seen that in your projects too.
If I can add, the problem with goats and Japanese knotweed is they just get the top and the root's still there, and it just keeps coming and coming and coming. And so that's very difficult. But Paul, as you noted, depending on the time of year, the knotweed that is removed, if it's pre-treatment with the chemical, can actually be used for animal feed. If we do the Japanese knotweed later in the year, we may have to do a complete cut so we get fresh growth to treat with the herbicide. If we do that, and if there is an opportunity to send it off for animal feed, we could do that. But I'm afraid this is one that goats can't handle.
It's also edible for humans. They
We can have a feast, community feast.
Yeah,
have a community.
it tastes a little bit like rhubarb.
Yep. Yep. Okay, the next question is entrance lighting, ? Gates to open or close, ?
I don't think, I think at this particular location in the city, I think that, I think with this restoration work, I think the days of the, illegal nighttime dumping are a thing of the past. All of the sites are open dawn to dusk. There's really actually, no, it's supposed to be use after dark. And I don't know if lighting came up in the first community meeting. And of course, for certain amphibians, salamanders, their migration, the less lighting is better. That's just something to consider. I don't know if was there a concern about security with lighting, perhaps?
I have to agree with that. Like one of the worst things for the environmental wetland areas, and I mean even in other places, is lighting, because it just messes with the nocturnal salamanders, lots of things get thrown off with lighting. So and with the park being closed after dusk, I don't think the responsibility is on the Parks Department to have that lit.
Yeah.
So no lighting, no gates.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Correct.
All right, this is a comment. Mustard weed removal is easy and very satisfying, so a good choice for volunteers. Knotweed, not so much. So that's exactly exactly the direction we're going in here. Okay, the last question, I believe, is one solution for mosquito control. The little guppy, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Poinsettia reticulata, has developed a big reputation. For decades, the fish has been championed as a mosquito fighter and dumped into ponds and ditches to eat up the insect larvae. Would this be a suitable solution? Tom, do you know the answer to that?
Well, I'm not familiar with that particular fish, but what I can tell you is that when you walk into Roslindale Wetlands Urban Wild and you look around, there are a number of areas that if you were in the middle of the woods of New Hampshire, you would think you were looking right at a vernal pool. And currently, we did spend a good half a day out there trying to find vernal pool species, and we did not find any. But the longer term goal I would have would be to try to improve water quality in this area in a way that maybe it could support amphibians, a large population of frogs. Those don't do well with fish. So I would rather encourage native amphibians to come in and try to improve water quality and deal with it that way. Things like bat houses might be a good alternative. And there may be, and leaving snags may also encourage additional birds and additional bat habitat that way too. I'm not familiar in particular with the fish, but I wouldn't be too crazy about introducing a fish in there because I feel like it may have some drawbacks on the wetland value overall.
And another question sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say that I know that I'm not sure when the inventory was done on the wildlife, but I do know at different times, certainly in the spring, there is, the residents have seen and I've noticed pretty big population of spring peepers and other types of amphibians, but some of them, at the time of the inventory may not have been as present, visible, or audible.
Yeah, we were out there looking for egg masses, and we may have just missed that, and the population may not be large enough to have been that obvious. It was an exhaustive study. We were just trying to see, what the health looked like. We did find a number of great insect populations in there, and some really good evidence that the area can support a diverse habitat. So I mean, it wasn't all negative, but I'd love to see that place, teeming with tadpoles in the future.
Okay, so at this point, the last question is there black swallowwort in the wetland and how to remove that? Oh, another question came in too, but I don't believe there's black swallowwort. Is there?
I haven't seen it.
I don't recall that.
Yeah,
That is a tough one to get rid of, but I don't believe it's here.
I did not see it. I did notice there's an app called iNaturalist, and I did notice that in Roslindale I believe there have been some sightings of it, but none were noted on this property.
Okay, the next question is I don't think you don't get purple martins, mosquito eaters, in the city.
Not sure about that.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question either.
Yeah.
Don't think we would have those.
We don't have those?
Okay, not to my knowledge.
Another, Deb is saying, I have not seen swallowwort in there. So that's good. Nearby on Weld Hill is black swallowwort. So good to keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
I also think of black swallowwort up a little bit higher and not so much in wetlands. Is that right? I mean, I'm used to seeing it more up on higher ground. So we may have to just keep an eye on it. Entering in, but it's so far not down in the wet part. Okay, Jim did it. All right, retyped this. You don't get purple martins in the city, right? They eat mosquitoes.
Right.
But I don't believe we get purple martins in the city. Correct, Anna?
I may have been confusing them with a different bird, but Yeah, I don't know.
Suzanne is saying we have a lot of black swallowwort in Roslindale. The ARB did some work with a moth that eats it. So again, we'll keep an eye on that one. It so far hasn't really made it in, but of course, now that we say this, we're gonna see it next time we go, but hopefully not. Purple martins need martin houses. Do you plan on placing any bird houses? I think we should think about that with the bat houses. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering. I remember there used to be a nonprofit called Earthworks, and they used to sponsor, the task force members will remember this, birding events with the Brookline Birding Club. And surprising, they did that a number of years, and I remember they tracked different species. And I remember there were some surprises when that land grant was filed for 108 Walter Street. I think Lana had found out that some interesting bird species were found there, but I think that would be definitely worth us considering, yeah.
Okay, let's see.
But probably we need to, we started at 7, just cap it
Okay.
at 8:30, maybe? Just-
Yep, I think we're actually, it doesn't seem, it seems more like statements, so I'll just sort of read the last bits here, and that might be it. Frank says less is more, good minimal design. Thank you for the work, Paul and team. Thank you. Swallowwort is all over Peters Hill in the ARB and everyone's yards, but I think the wetland is too shady and a bit generally too wet. Agree. Thank you. Yes, in open meadow. Agree. Thank you. The BWS storm water pipe may make cleaning the water more difficult.
I think that's worth addressing, just to let everybody know that we are working with the Boston Water and Sewer to try and get particle separation happening on the 2 inlets that are going. And there is a particle separator on one, and we're doing the research to try and figure out what's happening with the other one and make sure that is getting cleaned on the way in.
Okay. Support for bat houses. Woohoo. Purple martins houses are invariably invaded by house sparrows, which kill the chicks.
Yeah.
Duly noted. Thank you. This has been really informative. Thank you all for doing this. Thank you for joining us. Kathy McCabe found that there are various warbler species that come through the wetlands.
Another vote for that.
That's great. And this is a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you again for joining us. And then the last is another vote for bats. So I think we're in favor of bats. Okay, if that is all the questions, if anyone would like to speak, you could raise your hand, but we are, it is 8:23, so we've been here for quite a while, but we are happy to take on any questions if you would like for the next few minutes. Bats rule, yes. Thank you for your work. Thank you again for joining us. What's next? Jessica, do you want to say what's next?
What's next is we file the NOI with the Conservation Commission, and then we'll put this out to bid and hopefully get into construction in the spring. That's our goal. We'll see. Everything seems a little up in the air in 2020, but we will do our very best. All
All
right.
right, thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate you joining us, and
Yeah.
and thank you for all your questions. Oh, we have a couple more questions. Hold on. The
Talk about
NOI,
the NOI we filed. We are going for an RDA, filing the first portion of this, which is an RDA that's will be finished, well, it was filed yesterday. And to say that this is not an isolated wetland and not a bordering vegetated wetland, so that the DEP will not be involved. So it'll be a single filing. And I believe we'll do that on the next filing date. Next one we can get to. All right. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Design team will stay.
Okay.